Greetings and welcome to Liminal Light, a show that explores the language of myth and star, earth, tongue, and spirit through regular astrological forecasts. I'm your host, Chris. Enjoy. The prison bars and barbed wire fences and thick stone walls that run like lace embedded into the landscape glisten with electric current, seeping into the soil via colloidal aqueducts and ambient moisture, charging the dirt and grass, which clenches stones in the rhizome bundle like jade yoni eggs which quake in the obscurity of topsoil blankets. The static chirp of exoskeletal vibration distributed throughout the cold collections of green blades. At once, a world formidable and also volatile. Tremendous boulders waiting to change. We look across a property and envision how we'd hardscape it, carve channels through it, push ground into mounds, bank and bay, uproot and plant, sending in pigs to nose at the tenacious grip of stumps in search of concealed corn kernels. Swine push and sculpt the scape with snouts that hew the soil and roll stones, displace rubble, their bristled bodies obsessed and in motion. The maneuver and gesture of woodworkers turn the overgrown grove into root-bear stand. What was permaculture now is perpetual transformation. Particles of the process sifting through a pinball sorting system and arranging themselves into efficient articulation, spelling out the instructions hidden in the scrawling script of tree bark scrolls, which enwrap the phylum suction straws, pumping groundwater to elevation. Laws and edicts, descriptions of limits, locks and hinges, shearing strings and fissure lines, reassembly protocols, how to Rubik's Cube the territory, transform looming ledge and apply techniques to wider terrarium. With our fingers wrapped around the bars or laced within the links of our cages, we breathe the current into our bones, and perhaps within our bodies similar renovation is possible. The prison of skeletal assembly and cellular walls, infinitum, cracks and opens, encodes with blinking cursor at ready when we engage in ecstatic embodiment. With the return on regular lunation, this has explicit witchcraft implications. As the grid scan scrolls over us, and our volatilized awareness of our terrain, we weave into the landscape, scant separation between organism and environment, and thusly the intelligence of the genius loci and our own clinical comprehension. It is here that we find a more primal mind stirred up from deeper waters, and our lust grows deliciously wrathful with vampiric delight. If we find the other in nature around us, that which we can count and categorize comes into context with primal drives and the aesthetic rapture of predatory salivation. We can quantify the world as well as understand what hungers drive it and fuel its flux. The perpetual dolphin dipping paperweight upon the desk sprouts shark teeth and seethes with honeyed venom, holding down stacks of documents detailing the permaculture design proposal and the permits that initiate the action. We may fancy ourselves lounging upon the luxury leather chair, leaning back behind our desks of sprawling mahogany, gnawing our pen end as we fantasize our schemes into manifestation. We know there are no promises. This is a venture, all hypothetical, the prototype stage, experimentation with real materials and interactions with real persons, flora and fauna. The parameters of the lab expand into the biosphere, where even crows and hawklings scrutinize the assemblages of tree plantings, cold cupboards, clay ovens, reclamation pools, and herb terraces. The stars shatter in feedback above the tinged and chirp glassy notes back down to the mud and mortar below, barking like disintegrating dogs, dematerialized beneath the relay where all the roots plug into the sky behind the black background. Our world gets deep and detailed, and the blocks are likely to shift, or be open for reorganization. The pyramid shuffling its bricks in a much-needed update, processes both old and new, perennial and unprecedented, perhaps all at once, and somehow the same. We might taste blood for the first time and be driven into an erotic frenzy, and form the intensities of our embraces might rise opportunities for deeper knowing, comprehending deeper structures, allowing us to feel how far the caverns can actually penetrate. This is big, and there's a lot of space to move into, but largely the work happens away from the central station. No one seems to loiter the main drag, but instead be busy out on the frontiers where the home field meets the hedge. This is where the negotiation happens. This is where the deal is done, and this is where the creatures worth putting under the microscope populate and emerge. The sidewalks might support a few scattered cockroaches and rodents, but the tanglewood and brush which buffers the wilds teem with intelligence, and we might be served solutions by listening to insects speak and transmit the message back to inform us in how we might transform our own nests. The month opens with the moon in exaltation, which at this juncture in history involves jolts from Uranus and trines to both Saturn and Pluto. Aligning to natural pace and organic rhythm these days might be a revolutionary act within itself, and one that forces us to look soberly into the hard limits of nature and face our fears. We might step into such a space bodily and sync up to the greening force to begin what comes forth this September as an initiation into a multi-directional and dimensional process. Be present and feel it. The sun progresses into Virgo's second phase by Sunday, September 2nd, so we will likely be already identifying with the details of ongoing processes at this point, our eyes scanning what we are sorting. Mercury, Virgo's ruler, remains in Leo at this end of the month, trailing the sun, picking up the pace so he can catch up. We might still want to talk about ourselves, or at least those whom personally inspire us, as Mercury sextiles Venus on September 3rd at 9 a.m., a moment when we might want to remind ourselves who our heroes are. Mercury steps under the beams at this point, internalizing these realizations. On Wednesday the 5th at 8 p.m., Saturn stations direct in Capricorn, still trine Uranus and Taurus, and the tides of time somewhat turn as we ready to lay down innovative networks and branch out upon them, connecting old architecture to new systems. Anchoring into foundations, we may extend experimental arrays off the side of the stacked stone structure. The negation, rationing, and reduction of the past few months has helped us clear away the dirt and loose rubble from the lower layers, so we know where we can install radical updates most securely, and not build our additions off rotted walls. Only an hour and a half later, Mercury enters rulership in Virgo, and our ability to think, plan, organize, compute, and communicate the blueprints and plans that have been put in our hands is efficient and comprehensive. We could not be more ready to get started. Try to find this revolutionary renovation project in your life so that you don't instead sink into a quicksand of details. Not all ground is equal, so find the secure space and assess what needs to happen to change it for fertility's sake. How can it be more alive and bound for more abundance? And then what process needs to occur to carry out this transformation? Then draft a detailed plan and set some serious goals. Mercury steps across Regulus on his way into rulership, so ritual protocol is part and parcel, but also a consideration throughout this stage of how these radical processes can increase your renown, can able you to eminence, can revitalize your status. Mercury completes trines to both Uranus and Saturn the morning of Friday, September 7th, and the day rings loud and clear with what resonance his entry into Virgo detailed. Interesting that the Sun opposes Neptune in Pisces at 2:30 p.m. that afternoon, finding the frenetic inspiration born of comprehending this foundational radicalization, possibly leading us into swelling seas of intuitively connected details, oozing with imaginative vision. This can be both amazing, the moment you can picture the whole complex before it's built, able to sketch precise blueprints to an architectural masterpiece upon a paper diner napkin, and maddening as you duck into a phone booth to get out of the pouring rain and pull the wadded napkins out of your trench coat pockets to describe what the detail to your secretary over the phone, emptying your purse of coinage by the minute, both able to see the infinite scope of specifics as well as being lost in oceans of information. The following afternoon, September 9th, Venus in Libra clashes square against Mars in Capricorn, 90 degrees across the zodiac. Mars and Venus in combination can churn up sexual tensions, which of course energize more than our erotic endeavors, for better or for worse. This particular square pits strategic actions against balance of grace and accord, power moves and torsion against cultural equilibrium. Maybe our radical renovation plans are not as inspiring to our loved ones or neighbors as they are to us, and some diplomacy needs to be applied. Although Venus ingresses Scorpio the next morning, which brightly highlights the sexual dynamics, and our libidos more turned toward vampire aesthetics than flowers and harps. We hunger for the hunt and are driven toward primal desires, finding secrets sexy and mysteries romantically motivating, preferring intensity and danger to pleasant poems and sweet inscriptions. The sexual currents awakened by Venus and Mars's clamorous clash might inspire a taste for more poisonous elixirs. While these stirrings are likely to preoccupy our carnal emotions, there is a new moon in Virgo at 2 p.m., where we might experience quiet initiation into a subtle cycle of detailed attention. This may be the nuances of sensuality and kink interpreted into more fetishistic outlets in life besides the directly sexual, or it could be an altogether other topic, a dry set of seeds which just happen to get watered in deliciously devious fluids. On September 10th, Jupiter in Scorpio sextiles Pluto in Capricorn, a persistent aspect throughout the month due to both planets' speeds, and an interesting additional layer, connecting construction with seduction. Jupiter's coherence of intense engagement and total intimacy, what happens when two people mutually surrender, is harmonized with the obsession and immense power of moving beyond fears within the limits of nature and the vastness of enduring structures, such as monuments that stand for millennia, or ancient fortresses forgotten under the rising oceans. There might be mutually born masterpieces here, or subtle understandings of dominance, bondage, and servitude between partners, or embracing beyond breaches through unprecedented natures. Either way, the collaboration of Pluto with Jupiter in Scorpio implies an intense understanding of deep shadows where opportunities walk forth out of vast cavern depths and must be met with surrender to be embraced. The guru who frightens the student and overwhelms him with fear so that he might be initiated into greater mysteries. The Sun checks this Jupiter the following morning via sextile at 8 a.m., September 11th. Glancing to our fearsome guru, we nod in our rapid scrutiny, agree we will collaborate with his teachings. Simultaneously, Mercury moves into the second phase of Virgo, now able to tie together all phases of the process and think his way through while up to his elbows in splayed parts. What Jupiter instructs we do in Scorpio, the ordeals and ritual procedures communicate and make sense. Then it's the Sun's turn to see Pluto, and the cavern depths appear to be a perfect place to perform the rite as darkness becomes its own form of vision. We may understand what it is that the blind see and we normally do not. Wednesday the 12th sees Venus and Scorpio oppose Uranus and Taurus. Our lusty vampire sights the hybrid of Prometheus and Pan across the ecliptic, and dark Aphrodite finds herself polarized with the torch-bearing Satyr Faun. One salivates, seethes, yearns, and desires with such carnal depth it is a joy of pain, while the other leaps and flickers and sprouts wildly, sprays seeds, explodes with blooms, then suddenly stops silent, falls dormant, then once more springs alive again. These two natures must be put into balance, expressed or embraced in equal amounts simultaneously, or in equal portions in alternating but not jolting, rather a central oscillation of brooding and wild play. This moment sees Venus engage into a hanging T-square throughout the month of her opposition to Uranus and Mars's return to the nodal axis. This brings elements and new erotic emotions, especially to lingering or returning themes of the Mars retrograde, lunar eclipse, and Uranus ingress, which took place across the spring and summer. The moon passes over Venus at 6:30 p.m., and we are able to feel this tense array viscerally and encode it into our bodies and complex of needs, commanding us to nurture various divergent needs in life. The Sun progresses into the third decan of Virgo in the afternoon, and we look towards the realities of completion, of resolving and finishing that which is ongoing or up in the air. There's a general and non-specific urgency creeping in to most likely bring closure to what transpired between spring and fall, to begin the integration of what surgeries and hot rod modifications went down over mid-2018. By midnight, the urgency gained some weight, hopefully contextualizing it in a set of limits when Venus sextiles Saturn, emotional lust willing to play nice with material limits. We hunger for the whole menu, but only a few morsels are within reach. The rest are currently prohibited, so we pursue what's available now. With our considerable appetites whetted, the most defined possibilities begin to look attractive, like ham hocks and turkey legs hanging in the branches, or prime rib walking around on a pair of legs. Mercury opposes Neptune on the 13th, trines Pluto on the 15th, and then sextiles Jupiter on the 16th. Our logical sequences careen into intuitive and imaginative abandon, at which point the plan might swell to encompass massive herb spirals, hypercolor windmill generators, and cold fusion, daydreams between which important papers slip like oars that melt into the phosphorescent brine. Although the stretch of imagination out into the beyond and forgotten corners of things seems to be an initiatory experience, we may find here our next obsession, and we are likely to obtain it, or at least the opportunity to realize such dreams means only an intensification of our engagement, a serious getting serious, an understanding rolling up the sleeves, and linking arm in arm, and legs and whatever other body parts with partners and collaborators along the way. It can be done, but could require teaming up and getting in close quarters with others, whether this is lovers, co-conspirators, or enemies. By the 16th, Mercury has dashed into Virgo 3, and tying things up becomes the culmination of his number crunching and rapid research. Venus squares both nodes on this day, so our insatiable desires for red wine, black fabric, candelabras, and blood rattles the eclipse cycle cage, places a pivot point on the journey from outcast innovator to household name, dipping the new character in dark chocolate. The moon reaches its second quarter phase by 7 p.m. the same day, bumping the pace of manifestation and general energy up a notch. On 6 p.m. Tuesday morning, Mars Day, Mars Hour, Mars squares Uranus for the final time in this set of squares which occurred on May 16th and August 1st. The first one was filled with exhilarating surprises and frustrating disruptions. The second, and seemingly more violent, saw some lightning bolts strike some towers. And the third is hopefully going to be about what change ultimately occurs in the space that got rearranged or disturbed by the successive surges. Because of the speed of these planets, the aspect will stretch over the course of a few days, offering a sustained state of volatility, a long window to work with the energy in the lab and see what kind of radical update is to be installed. We must think on what we experimented with over the course of the past few months and what seemed to get the best results as we start considering and conceptualizing new modes of action. We must also be extremely careful, as what we hold here and throughout much of the month is a dangerous substance we are just getting used to working with. We must channel all the Virgo energy to pay it close attention, and the Capricorn energy to not underestimate its power, and all the Scorpio energy to push ourselves further into our experiments and be fearless. Jupiter moves into Scorpio 3 the next morning, and our understanding of addiction, depravity, and perpetual satiation blossom. We can flip over and look underneath the buggy and see what kind of problems infest it, poke and peel at the rust, check its sex is intact, etc. It's then we really know exactly what we're dealing with, after turning the bowels inside out and see exactly what the beast eats, compare the color of its bile, examine its spleen. The Horus Spexi has ancient roots, and is likely what will preoccupy us as the moon conjoins Mars, where he returns to the eclipse degree on September 20th. What happened, and now what happens, and what will happen because of it? Mercury completes a superior conjunction with the Sun between 9 and 10 p.m., and detailed messages concerning completion and resolution are handed down from a higher source. The next night, he ingresses Libra at 11:30 p.m. September 21st, and having received the heavenly word on closing all open cases, moves into an air sign where he puts his logical and communication skills toward justice, fairness, unity, and culture, speaking on others' behalves, and social justice expressions, as well as the careful weighing of options. The sun follows them in by 10 p.m. on the 22nd, marking the autumn equinox, and as the balance of light and of darkness, of day and of night perfects, we become most acutely aware of the other, or others, in every sense. This puts Mercury in position to square Saturn and trine Mars on Sunday the 23rd. The logic of fairness and justice often clashes directly with how society is structured, and often how nature itself is ordered. This is likely to put stress on our thinking on this day, which might be heavily internalized, seeing as somehow tongue-tied, as Mercury is here heavily combust. These ideals of social accord and equilibrium are in harmony with Mars's intentions towards freedom and escape from conventions of action in Aquarius. So this might also be an instance of processing and setting right the parameters of what has worked out through the retrograde and eclipse. Making sure the new mode is calibrated and balanced and communicating correctly, making social sense. Indeed, Mars is passing over the exact eclipse degree as the moon becomes full in Aries on September 25th, displaying the culminations of our manifest impulses and independence now in the context of the eclipse season. How do we feel and function now post-op? The Sun squares Saturn that night and echoes Mercury's sentiments from the couple days prior. With the Sun here, we might identify with these issues even more strongly, and as is the Sun's fall, we are susceptible to identifying more with someone else's situation than our own, which can use the reality check that this Saturn square implies, even if it comes as an abrupt run-in with a dead end. On the 27th, Mercury moves on into Libra's second phase and becomes quickly more adept at negotiation and agreement discourse, and can hopefully mediate whatever problems the Sun encounters. The Sun then trines Mars and harmonizes with these fringe activities, these visions of new conceptualizations, abstract tactics, theoretical actions. Again, this heavily highlights the situation of trying out our new equipment, what the eclipse season, the retrograde, and the Uranus ingress all altered and updated, and how it works in the context of culture and other people, in the social sphere, what people think of the new us, and how we react to their reactions. As an interesting cherry placed atop the social Sunday here, we get Venus progressing into the depths of Scorpio on Venus Day, September 28th. Venus in Scorpio really is the context we should remember colors the Libra activities. And in the second phase of Scorpio, she goes from deriving pleasure from hunting and chasing after her prey to being in the lock of primal embrace, in the midst of mating, or at least the intensity of the ritual dance. What she wants here is prolonged intimacy, eternal pleasure, the ultimate gratification everlasting. This could easily be, for the more generally indulgent, overdose and nymphomania, but will for the most be extremely overdoing it, and the seduction of darkness. This is what the devil whispers to you that you want, and it is that very devil that whispers to Mercury and the Sun, informing their ideas of justice and cultural accord, defining which culture we might be interested in particular around autumn equinox. As darkness rises to equal light, and what or who lurks there on the other side comes into view. Okay, welcome back to the show, Bonnie.
Good afternoon.
And today we have with us Alec K. Redfearn, who you might know from Alec K. Redfearn and the Eyesores, musician, occultist. How you doing, Alec?
I'm good. How are you?
Great, we're doing good.
Excellent.
Yeah, the weather's gotten a little bit better as we're moving into September. We had some irritating days, and now it's starting to cool off. We're both in New England and from New England, so this is typically one of the best times of the year.
Yeah, I love the fall here. It's always gorgeous. And it's an evocative season. It's sort of, I don't know, it's just, there's something about it. It's a bit of a liminal state that you get into in this season. You sort of walk between the worlds, and the things get very productive, which is really important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was thinking about that today and yesterday, and actually just kind of going over, looking at your record cover too, made me think of it, your new record coming out, as that the autumn equinox is when the sun moves into Libra, and Libra is the sun's fall, where the sun, because the sun is exalted in Aries and Libra is right across, and so Aries is like all about being independent and doing whatever you want to do in the moment, whereas Libra is like concerned with what other people are doing, and so we call it the fall. But originally, it's like because that's when the leaves fall. But I probably bet originally people were like, oh, the sun has moved into its fall, and that's the season of the fall. But that Libra,
that's interesting.
Yeah, and that Libra itself is when the sun is what we're paying attention to and what we're identifying with, and at that point we identify with the other. As the light and the darkness equal at equinox, we start to identify with like the other more than ourselves, and so it was making me think a lot about what you're presenting on your new record lyrically and on the cover, as it's called The Opposite, right?
Yeah, and that is all about the other. I guess the opposite is it's the sort of the idea of everything containing its opposite, which is a big thing that comes up over and over again in Jung and Carl Jung's writings, and in the Gnosticism and Kabbalah and all of the sort of various Western esoteric worlds. But I also like the idea of the other representing some part of yourself that you don't want to accept, or that you have difficulty accepting, that is constantly that can't be kept down despite our efforts, and how that needs to be embraced but maybe kept in check at the same time. It's that tricky balance.
Yeah, like kind of like the adversary that you're always pit against.
Exactly, right. The part of yourself that you have to learn to cooperate with, I guess. In order to be a whole human being, really, is to be able to accept this part of yourself that's maybe not as attractive, or maybe not as easy to accept for whatever reason. But also the idea that everything contains its opposite, and that the sort of idea of things that lean too hard in one direction are out of balance, which is one of the reasons why I've always been kind of I've avoided the political sphere, because it's so one side. It seems like that the tendency is to kind of veer toward one side, rather than looking at it as all of it as a whole that needs to be balanced in a certain way, rather than like, we have to veer one direction or the other. So I guess my mind has never really I don't know, I've never had the easiest time embracing that kind of thinking. It's all been very confusing.
Yeah, no, I feel the same way, that like that politics itself comes from that. Our idea of political thinking is from the paradigm of like rationalist, materialist, scientific Enlightenment era, like dualism, and that you're like, oh well, it's either these guys or these guys, and there's propaganda to make you be like, well, these guys are evil and these guys are good, like. Right.
This sort of binary thinking that is that things are just the either or, the binary aspect that they're just breaking down, really, like as time moves along. You see that in the way that like a way that the gender has become fluid, and in society we're starting to see more of that, and I think it's the sign that the binaries in general are breaking down, and that that maybe that sort of thinking is outdated.
Yeah, for sure. Which is really interesting, and that's what's so intriguing about The Opposite, because it presents something that at first almost seems binary, but then becomes challenging because it's like more a mirror than it is. It's like, oh, this is one and two. There's definitely a two-ness, like a one and then the other, but then it's like, oh, but this is also you. How do you deal with that?
Right. If there's the one and two of the mirror and the observer, but then there's also like a third thing is created by the act of observing.
Right.
And then you have a three and it snowballs from there.
Yeah, totally. And that's like, the classic triad that you see in mythology, that like as the cosmology of perfection, of kind of and you mentioned this in the lyrics, like the infernal twins, right? Like the one twin and the other, and you see like Cain and Abel, or you see that like in Norse mythology and in the whole Indo-European myth system, and then it kind of suggests like that there is this perfection where one and the ultimate opposites could coexist, but then they get ripped apart in the differentiation of the universe and become separate, and then don't come together again until the end of the larger cycle. And
right.
And I think I've thought about that a lot before, and I think probably in really similar terms to like how you're thinking about it, because looking at your record cover, you have the snakes in there as well. And I've thought of how that process of those twins really mirrors like the kind of double helix, like intertwining snakes of like DNA, Right.
Yeah, and it's a symmetrical symbol. You're relatively symmetrical. It's not completely symmetrical, but I basically like created that, using the sort of like the classic sort of Austin Spare style compressed alphabet sigils, where you can come up with a statement of intent and then remove the vowels and sort of create a symbol using the letters. But then that from there it's and then the idea that you forget the original statement and let just the symbol kind of contain it, and so that to activate the subconscious. But as I kept messing with it, I it's, instead of getting simpler, it kind of got more and more ornate, and it is and ended up becoming what it is now, which is at this point it's become something became such a subconscious process that I'm curious. I'm actually always curious to hear what other people take from it, because I feel like I've gotten close to it, and it might mean something. It's interesting to hear your observations on it, because
while you were talking before we started recording, you were talking about seeing neon dragons in the dark, and that immediately made me think of this cover.
Yeah, when you mentioned it, we were looking at this image and we were like, oh yeah, that's totally makes sense. Yeah, so maybe.
Well, just getting back to what I had said before we started recording, when I was about 3 or 4 years old, my parents have told me this. I don't remember it. Me and the girl who lived next door, I grew up in Massachusetts, in the kind of a wooded suburban area, but we had sort of nightshade berries. They were bright red and very tempting to children. They looked like, I think I was trying to convince my neighbor to eat them with me, to have an anthogenic. I don't think I was aiming for an anthogenic experience. I think I told her that I thought they were jelly beans from Bugs Bunny.
Yeah.
Which is true as well, right?
Yeah.
Right. She wasn't buying it, but I ate them, and apparently had a near-death experience where, I was in the hospital. My heart rate got very slow, but
wow.
For a few years after, I would have the occasional sort of flashback type hallucination, and I like I mentioned earlier, I remember one time just sitting in my bedroom. It's a very vivid. I remember I used to share a bedroom with my sister when we were very little, when we were like 5 or 6. Where I was 5 or 6, she was like I think 3 or 4 at that point. She's 3 years younger. And I remember seeing like neon dragons, like flying across the walls, just sort of like flashing, these kind of flashing lights, and that was a pretty like something that kind of burned in my mind at a pretty young age, and has definitely stayed with me into adulthood. I still feel like the certain things that I see behind my eyes, even as an adult, when get into either like taking some kind of entheogenic drug like psilocybin or something like that, or just getting into an intense meditation state where you start to see flashes of light or things like that. But sort of tunnel imagery always comes up. Sort of flying through some kind of tunnel is something that I've it seems to be a recurring thing in my mind that's been around since childhood. And I don't know, I've always asked a lot of questions about it. When I started reading, more of the sort of esoteric stuff, it started making a lot more sense. The things I was seeing, the things I was feeling as a youth, as a little kid, connected with this kind of thing that's maybe older. And maybe, it was interesting to run across that in that way.
Yeah, certainly. And of course, it's dragons, right? Kids think about dragons, but then if it's real, then definitely they're involved, especially at that early stage. Anyone can take tropane alkaloids now and have an experience and peel back those layers and get into that disassociated state. But as a child, it's like what we say about if you move into an old house and you have a family and you test the kid for lead poisoning and they're like, oh my God, he's off the charts, get him out of here, because not as important for the parents because their mind has developed into maturity. But when you throw that ally in that that plant ally in there at a developmental stage, then it's going to change the whole orientation of the organism.
Right. Plant ally. Have you read the? I was going to mention this to you guys. Have you read the Dale Pendle trilogy?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the Pharmacopoeia, Pharmacognosis.
Yeah,
those are great books. I read those last year. I was totally blown away.
Yeah, totally. That completely changed my idea of magic and of ontology in general. It definitely was everything up to that point just got kind of scrambled. It was okay, wait a minute, now I have to rethink everything.
Right. And also just in terms of how to structure a book, it's so unique.
Exactly.
The way that he's moving between hard science and esotericism and stuff like that. It's such a smart dude. Very impressive.
Yeah. I think I read those 10 years ago, and luckily someone just showed them to me, and I was like, oh wow. And I always was like, why can't someone do continue this and as or this is just how books should be written, right? I was like, oh, this is this is how you cover a subject. And especially I had pined for a non-entheogenic herbal, whatever that means, just a regular every plant, and it really seems to be happening culturally now, and we lost Dale Pendle in the past year and a half. I forget the exact date, but as he's
did he die this year?
Yeah, recently. I think last year at some time. I can't remember the date, but as he's moved on, what he's left behind as a paradigm is seems to be culturally blossoming in a huge way. He's really changed the way people look at what they're interacting with.
Yeah, I think was it Daniel Schulke?
Mm-hmm.
He was apparently Dale Pendle's student, or I had heard somewhere that they had studied together, or that he had studied with him. But I might need to verify that information. But I think I'd heard that there was a connection between those two guys. And, I know that I actually haven't read any of Schulke's stuff. I have a couple of his books, but I haven't actually gotten to them yet. But I know that he sort of continued in that sort of plant magic tradition.
Yeah,
working in a.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they put out some of his other writings outside of that trilogy, and and that's one of the schools of people that I was talking about who has continued his work. The way of just looking at plants, there's the Verdidus Genii conference, and they put out something called Verdant Gnosis, and all the stuff that Daniel Schulke puts out in Three Hands Press. It's it really has Dale Pendle put out that kind of framework of how to look at plant interactions, and I think the involvement of the poetry is really important, and the involvement of the lyricality, and taking that seriously and allowing to your subjective approach to almost dominate your objective approach, looking that we shouldn't throw away scientific thinking altogether, but just to recognize that it's a tool, it's a toolbox,
Right.
But that the rest of what you think and how you experience things just as important, if not more, because it's the larger experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it is interesting. You make an interesting point about the sort of world of sort of what Robert Anton Wilson called fundamentalist materialism. That sort of that very science-heavy world that believes in one explanation for everything, and how that needs to be, that sort of thinking is necessary for certain aspects of things, but when you get into the realm of thought or the realm of spirit, the realm of anything into the abstract, when you get into the abstract end of things, those sort of rules go out the window,
Yeah.
But but I also feel like a lot of that stuff is really geared towards literalism in religion, or geared towards like combating literalism in religion, specifically like the fundamentalist world and that sort of thing. But I think they have a tendency to throw the baby out with the bathwater, which is unfortunate, and maybe that scientific thinking will evolve in the coming years, and especially with the new physics and the way that's sort of gone. I feel like this sort of slightly spiritual aspect to the language has entered back into science a little bit, and maybe in the coming years we'll see more of a marriage of the two worlds again, and maybe like in the sort of like in alchemy or the early Hermeticism and that sort of thing, where these worlds were kind of one.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I haven't thought of it as that. I guess I thought of it kind of, as I mentioned, as like as we accept animism, which is like highly likely if you look at millennials being into like just resource sharing and generally being like, oh yeah, of course my dog has a soul, of course a tree has a soul, like younger people are just, they already see the world that way. There's not like a struggle to get there, and but that they that as soon as we kind of enter that animism, that like I said, science just becomes like a toolbox. But I like what you're saying, that it's more than that an actual hermetic marriage is possible. I didn't really, I thought of it more as more reductively than something that has that an interesting, I don't want to say utopian kind of like complement, but it does, but there is that like that kind of ideal, like a golden ideal to kind of like uphold, be like, oh yeah, we can marry all of these things and have this like strive for this elegance.
Well, I mean, I think that's been the problem with atheism, is that the red herring that religion is bad, or that sort of spirituality is a deception, and I feel like that's sort of like, it's not that religion needs to be cast out, it's just that it needs to be rethought, redefined, and couched in a way that sort of works with science, works alongside with science rather than working against it. I mean, I think that's sort of something that I hope we'll be seeing in the coming years, and I think it is a possibility, because I think there's still a large portion of the population that still needs some kind of spiritual fulfillment, or at least some kind of worldview that entertains that. And but at the same time, we need to evolve and become smarter and and I don't know. I feel like a lot of these problems will probably work themselves out, but it's going to be an interesting few years. And I think we are at a sort of pivotal point in terms of, as a human race, in terms of our own sort of evolution, and the way that we've sort of taken charge of our evolution, that we may be the first earthen species to do that, to actually like have a direct hand in our evolution.
Yeah.
And it's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think everyone does. I think like the most base person, you could be like, we're at a pivotal point right now, like culturally, in the evolution of the human existence as an organism and mind pattern, etc. Even the most base person would be like, definitely it's weird what's going on, But yeah, I think I like the idea of like what we do with science and religion, and we can call it religion, and we can call it, sometimes I just reduce it just to like engagement, like if you're actually like engaging with what you're experiencing, but
yeah,
but
that's a great word, actually.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But that we need that rigor, whether it looks exactly like science or not, like, because you see that with like working with the grimoires, that once you get past like initiating contact, at that point it's just kind of the doors are open, and what you experience can really become just like total madness, or like it can actually like start being functional, and you can do things with it, and you can kind of start structuring it and drawing a map and navigating, but if you come at it with the kind of like what has been presented as like through some elements of chaos magic, and especially through what's easily recognizable in like mind, body, spirit culture, is just completely following your intuition, you don't get enough of that checking yourself to making sure you're on track, and making sure that you're self-criticizing, to that you're like, okay, this is real. So it takes like a complete acceptance and an engagement with your imagination, because it happens where the imagination happens, even though you're doing something operative rather than passive in a sense. But but you still need to like put some sort of like critical framework upon it to make sure that what you're experiencing is real enough that that it's actually at that liminal point between manifestation and imagination, rather than you're just living a fantasy, which is like just as good too in a way. But like if you want those results and you want to start bringing more to the table from the other side of the veil, like it has to have a critical dimension,
Oh, definitely, yeah. And I guess the wisdom lies in knowing the difference, knowing where you knowing what's real versus what's just sort of a reflection of your ego or something. That like the spirit's telling you what you want to hear, I guess.
Right. Yeah.
For
totally.
lack of a
yeah, that's right. I tell people, like, if they're disagreeing with you, you're doing it right.
Right. Yeah, and I know it's kind of it's been a big thing in Goetia and a lot of the grimoire spirits. It's interesting that the idea that you're kind of you're dealing with a sort of trickster element, where you're trying to work around a certain amount of like willful sort of willful personalities out there in the on the other realm. So I guess it depends on how you approach it, really. I don't know if you've been keeping up with Jake Stratton Kent's ideas at all. He's sort of
absolutely, yeah.
He's his approach is really interesting, of like kind of trashing the whole sort of Western esoteric tradition, all the sort of like Victorian ideas. He's sort of throwing those out, and like just taking the grimoires completely at face value, completely like as like just sort of trying to get rid of the Golden Dawn aspect of things, which is interesting. In some ways, though, I miss Kabbalah, because I like the system of Kabbalah. I think there's something about it that resonates with me, but at the same time, I guess you can kind of approach it however you want.
Yeah, I think the Kabbalah, like, you can. I think like part of it is just recognizing that it's not the root stock, but if you still like to jam on it as a descriptive structure of the universe, like after like things are rolling, you can present it. Say, for this is just one example, you can present it to a spirit and be like, hey, can we talk about things in terms of Kabbalah? Can we like kind of organize it in that shape? And the spirit might be like, yeah, fine, absolutely, but that like isn't necessarily like the classical root of the whole cosmology back in history,
Right. Yeah, it's definitely interesting. It's definitely an interesting thing to incorporate when you're dealing with that world. So what were you? we were going to talk about, what was it? Oh, you wanted to talk about magical trajectory, sort of.
Yeah,
Should I get and talk about that?
We're running out of time here, and so maybe
okay.
for this one episode, and then we're gonna continue in a moment here. But
that sounds
okay.
Maybe this would be a good time to kind of wrap this up then, and why don't you just tell people who are listening about your new record coming out and what they can expect to hear and where to find it and what you're about to go on tour, right?
Yep. Yeah. Okay. So the new record is The Opposite. It's coming out on Cuneiform Records, which is out of DC, or the DC area, and it's going to be on vinyl and CDs, because apparently they like CDs down there. I don't know. I've never been a CD person. I don't. But there is there's definitely an audience that buys CDs for this label, so they want to do CDs. But it's basically, in the past we had been kind of a band that went from a very large amount of members, sometimes up between 9 and 15, I think was the most people. And in the past few years we've just been kind of paring it down, and it's a 4-piece now of myself on accordion, Chris Sadler's on contrabass, string bass, and Shaddle on French horn, and Matt McLaren on very minimal 3 or 4-piece drum kit, I guess you'd say. It's a tom, snare, kick, and he's got some metal objects he hits. Chris and I, the bass player, and I are both using a lot of pedals. So instead of adding extra musicians, we just are adding layers of electronic manipulation of the sound. Mm-hmm. And I've also started incorporating on this record, started using the realistic MG1 on the record, which is the Moog realistic synth from about 1980. Since then, I've sold that and gotten into Eurorack modular synths, and that's probably going to reflect the next phase. But so I think musically the record sort of it's a little bit. You'll hear some of what we used to do in the sound, but I also feel like there's elements of a lot of the songs are written using a drum machine as the rhythmic basis. So a lot of this is going to be a little bit more trance-like and repetitive, I think. Lyrically, like I said, it's like we've been talking about. There's a lot of magic and a lot of kind of automatic type writing.
Wow.
In the lyrics, a lot of stream of consciousness stuff, and I tried not to. I think for this batch of tunes, I was really trying to do as little thinking as possible and trying to be as intuitive as possible. And I also tried to keep things as minimal, as simple as possible, which is a challenge because I tend to write stuff that's very dense and has a lot of notes. And it was interesting to experiment with kind of paring it back,
Yeah, that's really interesting. I definitely have felt that going on in general, and I've been trying to ask a lot of the more creative people that we have on the show about that, as Saturn's in Capricorn, and there's been like a major pruning back and a really sobering time. A lot of people are quitting substances and like getting their diets and exercise in order and getting on budgets and getting serious, but seeing that happening in music too, and stuff getting really pruned down and pared back to the basics is really cool to see. And I totally agree with you that there's something a brewing that is trance based coming up, and kind of stream of consciousness based, and that's going to come out of like the wake of this kind of like kind of escape into techno that everyone has been following in the past few years, like that.
Yes.
There's elements there that make sense, but that the next thing has this more ecstatic trance, stream of consciousness, poetry, engagement element to it that I definitely see coming up in like your newest music.
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, I just like the sort of I feel like that the sort of return to techno in music that's happened in the past years. I feel like that we're going to see an evolution of that becoming something new, something that rather than just sort of a nostalgia thing, it's going to. I feel like that people have settled into it enough that we're going to start seeing we're already starting to see like what the next phase is. You know, like that there's going to be a new thing that will come out of it, rather than just simple nostalgia. You know, which is interesting. You know.
Yeah, totally.
Oh yeah, and I guess the other thing I should mention is that we are going to tour in France, mostly France, Germany, France, Belgium. We're leaving on September 11th, coming back on the 30th of September, so it'll be a couple weeks out there. Yeah.
Nice.
And I'll be in North Carolina this weekend playing at the Prague Fest. Prague Day. I'm sorry. Okay. The Prague Day Festival. It's a Prague Rock Fest. So that should be fun.
Do you have any like pilgrimage spots like picked out for while you're in Europe?
No, I was thinking about that because we're going to be in France a lot. I was thinking about if you have any recommendations, let me know. But I haven't gotten that far. We often don't have a lot of time when we're traveling over there to do any pilgrim. But I do kind of want to look at where we're going and see if there's some interesting stuff. I know we'll be in the Brittany area, so we'll be in like Gilles de Rais country. So maybe we can, look for some kind of look for Gilles de Rais,
towers filled with towers filled with skulls and such.
The crypts.
Yeah, that's actually what I was going to say. If like in France, I think I would split my time between the Virgin Mary and diabolism.
Right. Yeah, there's. I guess it is. Where is it? Is Fatima? Is that in France or is that in Portugal? No, Lourdes is in
Portugal.
France.
Yeah. There's. I'm trying to find where. There's the Saint Martha, like Tarascon, France. I don't know if you're into Saint Martha at all, but I'm really excited to go there because we're planning to drive through France
in February.
So it's by Arles. It's between Arles and Avignon.
Oh, okay.
So.
I
think we'll be down that way.
Yeah, Saint Martha is a really interesting saint who's flourished. Seems like mostly more in France than anywhere else, right?
Mm.
But she bears a torch and dominates a dragon, and she has
there's multiple versions of
Yeah, you see her in the ATRs as Saint Martha the Dominator, and what's her? I can't remember her Orisha kind of syncretism name, but
okay.
Yeah, you see her like wrestling a snake in kind of Orisha statues, and yeah, they're like definite like analogs to Hecate as well, with like the bearing a torch and being like able to control chthonic deities and such.
If you listen to I don't know if you've listened to Radio Golgotha, the podcast, but they have a wonderful meandering episode dedicated to her that goes into many wonderful and interesting topics. I highly suggest it.
Yeah.
Excellent.
It's 3 hours.
Totally look for that.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, that's like, so definitely listen to that, and also check out Alec K. Redfearn and the Eyesores' new record, The Opposite. And also check in with us. We're going to continue this conversation for members on my Patreon, and so we're going to get to that right now, so hopefully you'll follow us along. Thanks, Alec, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll talk
to you soon.
Yeah, we'll talk to you next time. Bye.